Can you tell us what Honeycomb has been up to? I've been hearing all sorts of stuff. I follow Liz directly, watch all of her things. She's changing her role now too. So what else is going on at Honeycomb?
Yeah, Liz was just promoted to field CTO, a role which she richly deserves. I feel a little sheepish. I just learned what field CTOs were about 2 months ago, and I was like, shit, we already have one of those. You know,
change your business cards. That's you.
I know, exactly. Yeah, and we just shipped some really exciting things. I actually showed the tiniest bit of a sort of a demo of Bubble Up at the end of my talk, which is just the way you have an SLO and some events have failed, and so you can scroll down, you can see exactly what's different about the events that failed the SLO versus the events that succeeded the SLO. Right. And this is a thing that it's one of these features that you can only have with a tool that has observability, because it relies on you having these arbitrarily wide structured data blob, one per request that has all the context packed up in it. But once you have those, you can do all these magical things like, oh, there's a spike I care about. I'm going to draw a little thing around it, and you're going to pre-compute for me for all of the dimensions inside the bubble I care about and outside of it, and diff them for me so you can see the baseline versus, the thing I care about. And what's amazing about that is, like, traditionally we've had dashboards. We'll just figure, okay, there's a spike in the dashboard, but then you can't correlate that with any other spike in a dashboard. You're just like, well, I hope that 918 is roughly 917 there. It's just madness. But with observability, you can actually go, okay, this thing I care about, it's different, not just in these 1 or 2 different ways, but it might be different in 5 or 6 or 10 different ways, which you'd never be able to find by hand. You can just do it immediately with that kind of a one-click thing. So we just shipped a bunch of improvements to that, so it's not just restricted to heat maps. You can do it for any dimension, anywhere, whether it's a trace or whatever. And it's just people, I constantly get these tweets from people who are just like, oh my God, we've been spending 5 weeks on this bug, and we instrument it with Honeycomb, and suddenly, like, half an hour later, there it is, and it's just like, it can be so easy, and it's just exciting.
It can be, yes. Really good on that. It's really funny because, like, there's so many things that a lot of software as a service, a lot of things where people want to hide, they want to abstract that complexity from you. They want to almost nestle you, right? But the thing is that there's times where it's really important. Like, no, I really do want to see these numbers. I do want to drill down. Maybe something at the command line, would help me at this, right? Yep. So I think that this is the balance these days, is we're trying to make things simple, but by doing so, we're taking away instrumentality. Totally.
Absolutely. I saw this viscerally from the other side. Before Honeycomb, I was at Parse, where we were the mobile backend as a service, right? And it was so easy. You could write a mobile app with our SDKs and our APIs and everything, and we did all the backend stuff for you. But then when things started to go wrong, you couldn't even see, like, people would be composing these queries that accidentally did a 5x full table scan, and they couldn't even tell, right? We could tell.
Wow.
So, like, because they're just using the SDKs. You get a couple things out of order, and suddenly you're auto creating the indexes and everything. The more magical it is, the more less of control you have, right? And you're
making foot guns fully automatic, right?
Absolutely, you're making automatic foot guns everywhere, right? And like Parse got shut down. Like the next wave of changes that I was hoping we would build would be at least visibility into that, so you could see the effects of what you were doing. Because so many of these engineers, they're good engineers, they could do it if you give them the tools, but these beautiful glossy little abstractions don't give you the kind of visibility that you need to write anything that's even halfway performant.
So I wanted to bring up something that you brought up early in your talk, and again, I'm a lifelong gamer, and it hit me. I knew some of the folks at Linden Labs, right? And I've also played a fair share of virtual worlds myself, and it's this concept of gameplay, which should be exciting, right? This should be gripping. This should be, every fiber of your being is engaged. At the same time, you want this glitch-free experience, so you want that to be boring. And it's this combination of the balance between the exciting and the boring, I think, is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I think for engineering in general, you have the same thing. You want people to be engaged in their engineering work and to be excited about the improvements that they're making, the applications they're making. But you want to make the process of, like, it shouldn't be a torture of the damned to just make a release, right? It shouldn't, like, there needs to be this balance between the boringness of your day-to-day job as an engineer and the excitingness of what you're bringing to market.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, somebody was just like, "You're supposed to be in this thing over there," so I'm asking them to reschedule. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You know, and this is where, like, I feel like, you know, this is always the tension, right? You've got the daydreamers, you've got the artsy people, and then you got us, who it's our job to make it work, right? And
Right.
and they're always trying to push the boundaries of what's possible, and we love that, but we have to be able to deliver, right?
Yes, exactly. So one of the things we were talking about was 4-9s in the game community, and what that. So I just, you know, did very simple arithmetic, and 4-9s in a community of just 1 million players means 100 constantly unhappy players. Right?
Love it.
And
yes.
And the thing is that it's not just 100 unhappy players, because now in gaming especially, any one of them could be a Twitch streamer, and their 100,000 followers could be observing.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
I mean, I don't love that, but I love that point. I'm writing it down. Yes.
So,
yes.
And how many?
The right amplification is massive.
Exactly. And how many Twitch streamers get like millions of followers just for falling through the floor of a virtual world?
Yep. Exactly.
So
it's a love-hate relationship for sure.
Exactly. So it's glitch streaming is what I call that, right?
Nice. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so true. And this is what, you know, it could be, we can get cranky about this, but this is what pushes the bounds of computing and what's possible, right? It's this constant like push-pull and like making bets that you hope you can cash later, and then figuring out how to cash it at 3 a.m. with, you know, half your team online, just sort of going, throwing shit at the wall. There's a lot of creativity in even the boring parts of computing, right? There's a lot of creativity in just like, how are we going to keep this running with duct tape and string until we can really fix it, right? People don't often give that, and I'm sure there's just as much boring stuff involved in the fun stuff, right? Because you still gotta use your frameworks, you gotta learn the tools, you gotta do, you know, you really want to be as exciting as possible while spending as little time being exciting as possible. Right. The inherent razor's edge.
I mean, let's put it this way. All the Twitch streamers want to have the downing of the boss video, right? But how many people quit because they can't manage their bank tabs?
Exactly.
Exactly. It's the boring things that become the odious parts of why you quit a game, or the grinding as opposed to that adventuring spot.
But it wouldn't feel as great if it didn't have the grind. If you could just log in and do it, it wouldn't be interesting. Like it takes, it really is that, what is it they call it in education? It's the zone of, I was just reading about this the other day. There's a zone, it's a zone of something, but it's like, it's just like with learning, you know, you want to hit that zone where it's hard and it holds your interest, it keeps you going, but not so hard that you just give up because it's impossible.
Exactly.
And it is different for everyone too, which makes this even more challenging.
So the other thing is that you said a lot of things that are pretty darn heterodox, which like observability has nothing to do with pillars.
Right. So they're just fucking data types, dude. Like they're just metrics and logs, and you trade. The thing is, like, I get why they're saying that there are pillars because the strategy of most companies out there is to buy or build like a product for each data type, which is regressive. Like it's bad. The more of those you get, the worse it is, because you can't tie them together. You can't correlate anything together. Now you could, from the arbitrarily wide structured data models, you can derive metrics, you can derive traces, you can derive logs from those. You can't go in the other direction. So if you don't have this to start out with, kind of your only choice is like keep adding more of them. But like if you're an engineer who gets woken up, you know, got a dashboard, there's a spike. Well, now you have to jump over and try and find it in your logs with nothing tying them together, right? And then you have to find something in the log. You have to copy paste the ID into the tracing tool and hope that event happened to be one of the ones that got traced. And that's just, the bigger you get, and the harder your systems, the more miserable and impossible that is.
You have to make your own correlations. Yeah.
Right. Because the correlations are everything. That connective tissue is everything. And when you've broken it up into data types, like you don't get that. And I think people don't understand just how much they're suffering because they are the only connective tissue between all of these data types. And it's terrible. You should be able to, like, you know, be tracing and then jump into logs and then up to metrics and then down to get to the trace. You know, you should be able to move fluidly through all of these things without having them partition off technically,
Siloed.
you know, siloed off. Exactly. And the more I get very worked up about this, but like, and it's expensive too, because you have to store to save that data another time for every tool and a different tool for every team. And I believe that these tools of, like, the silos of tools are what builds silos of people, because they aren't speaking the same language. They aren't even looking at the same data set. They don't see the same reality. So yeah, the pillars can fuck off and die as far as I'm concerned. They were a marketing thing from the beginning. And like, look, after starting a company, I'm all about marketing, but marketing has to be how you connect with people and explain their problems to them, not how you sell them shit. And the pillars were invented to sell you shit.
Exactly. Yes. So I totally believe in what you're saying. Now, the other thing that you said that's going to be considered kind of heresy for some people is, you said literally very few customers complain. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to take issue with that one.
I know. So this will be a question of asymmetry, right? When you're sitting on the receiving end, it feels just like when you're on Twitter and you get, there's a wave of pile-ons, right? It feels like a never-ending deluge. But it's actually not. Most people who experience a timeout are just going to give up or go on or do something else or turn away. Something like, they've done studies and it varies, but something like 1 in 10 to like 1 in 100 people will actually complain. Anytime you get
that was the famous TARP study back in the 1980s. I remember that. You know, so yeah, 1 in 10 people are complaining to you. Another face. 1 in 10 are the terrorists that go out and tell everybody else but you.
Yes, thank you. That's a much better way of putting it. Yeah, there are a lot of complaints out there that you don't hear, you will never hear. And this is why I feel like so many of our systems for like aggregating, responding to complaints and stuff, they're oriented around this idea that, well, the loudest ones win, right? Like the ones that people are, but like the loudest ones are often not the real ones or the interesting. They're often ones you have no control over, right? It's like, well, there's a router over there. A lot of people are impacted, but you don't have any control over that. Whereas, you know, there could be, and if all of your attention is going to those ones that are big, you might be missing this small trickle of ones who are telling you something really scary about, you know, currency or about, you know, really glitches or something. You know, you need to structure how you handle these in such a way that, you know, there are few enough that engineers can really be exposed to a non-filtered set of complaints, so that, because often they'll be able to see something, go, this smells to me, right? And you know, this is why on-call is so critical, you know, and I think of like responding to customer complaints as being just a form of on-call. And, you know, with the last generation of tools that we've had, there was nothing high cardinality in that, but the only way we could really find these was by listening to customer complaints. And part of what I was saying in my talk is that in exchange for having fewer paging alerts, you have to get off your ass and go investigate more, right? You have to look at your code in production. You don't just trust that you'll hear about it, right? You need to go check after your deploys and go, is my instrumentation, is it working as intended? Does it look weird? Spend some time like sitting with it and, you know, toying with it and like playing around with it, because all that context you have in your head after you've written something, you know why you built it, you know what you built, you know what you tried that didn't work, you know what the function names are, the variable, you know everything. It's only going to decay, right? Nobody's ever going to know more about it than you know right now. And taking that and using it to just like look around in production is some of the most high leverage thing that it's the best thing you can do with your time while it's still fresh. And that's like the only way that you can kind of start to get a leap on these things that users are going to start trickling in, because by the time their complaints start to reach you, it might have not even be you. It might be someone else on the team, and they're going to have to start from scratch, right? You're going to find most of the interesting bugs you will ever find in your lifetime right in that short window after you've deployed it.
I think this gets directly to your point of find your bugs before your users do, right? That's what you're talking about, is observe the thing running, find out how it's performing. And for instance, I think that in physical plants, we already know this about predictive maintenance and IIoT. We're already watching these machines so that you do the preventative maintenance and you have the truck roll before the machine blows up.
Exactly.
But we're not doing the same for software. We wait for
Right.
it to blow up, and then
Right.
we the alarms go off, the 5-alarm fires, the critical accounts management, but we only wait until the plate has crashed. We're not watching the plate spin down.
Well, I think totally. I think part of this is kind of a holdover from the whole DevOps debacle, where it was like devs would literally just like merge their code and like walk away, right? Well, somebody else is going to deploy it, build it, deploy it, test it, and run it. And at some point in the future, I might get some support, but like support tickets. But like, there is this idea that your job was done as soon as you finished writing it and it passed the tests. Your job is not done until you've watched it in production, which is why it's so important that be a really short interval, like 10, 15 minutes, ideally, before it's running somewhere you can watch real users running it. Like, a production REPL is like the ideal that I was talking about, right? Because being able to watch, like, your code isn't real until it's running in production with users using it. That's when you find out what your code actually does, and not before.
Yeah. The other thing too that I wanted to bring up is that, like going back to this gaming analogy, there are some times when, for instance, you're making a change and that the change you're making will have an incremental improvement or an incremental difference to the world. And so, there's some changes that you want to make that there should be, nobody saw that, right? It just happened magically in the background.
Yeah.
But then there's some other changes that you do that as soon as you commit it, that there's this pent up demand for it. And you should be expecting the stochastic event when it hits, good or bad.
Well, this is why, and I didn't put this in my talk and now I'm kicking myself. This is why it's so important to decouple deploys from releases using feature flags. You could, like, your deploy should be constant, small, just going out the door swiftly many times a day. Your releases should be intentional, and they should be, ideally, they should be happening when you flip a flag, right? And you shouldn't be flipping it off to on. You should be like flipping it for internal users, and then flipping it for maybe your a set of users that you trust internally, and then flipping it for Facebook. Always did 10% of users in Brazil first for some reason. I don't know what Brazil ever did to them, but like it was like you flip the flag for 10% of users in one region, and then you gradually increase it, and then you pick another region, and it would take days for the change to roll out fully. But there was a lot of very granular control and and checkpoints where, yes, there's automated checks. They're like comparing the control group to the new release group, but also the engineer is supposed to check in on it and be looking for maybe it's not supposed to have an effect, so great, check it on that, that's easy, and maybe there's like a set of control users that you can compare it to and just watch for weirdness, right,
exactly. And I think that right now we're so far behind the curve in managing to expectations that we're nowhere near on top of managing for nonlinear behavior.
Yes. Good point. I want to write that down.
Yeah.
So how do we do that here?
So I have some thoughts about this. One of them, for instance, just doing in terms of scalability testing or performance testing, I've called the torpedo test. We always run our benchmarks, presuming that all the servers are available, right? And so if I'm going to deploy 12 servers, so I have 12 servers, what's the maximum throughput I can get out of that? Yeah. And what I'm suggesting is at that time of initial testing, knock one of them down immediately, like in the middle of like scale up, right? What does that do? Totally. You've taken a torpedo under the waterline. So how does that affect your throughputs? How does that affect your latencies? How does that affect the quiescence of a server as it stands up? Now hit a second one. What happens? Right? And this is like chaos engineering before production.
Yep. I like what Josh just said too. The traffic replay is the way. It's funny you say that because that is the gold standard. I have now written 3 versions of this for 3 different databases, MySQL and MongoDB and Cassandra, just like capturing 24 hours worth of traffic, taking a snapshot, take it offline, and restarting the computer to play it, clear all the caches, and then like replaying it as fast as possible, and then replaying it under this, the same like time ticks, and then adding stuff, on top of it, and just being like, oh, this, and this started back when, we were upgrading from MySQL 4.1 to 5.0 at Linden Lab. 5.0 was the tool that looked a lot faster on paper, but when we upgraded the primary database at Linden Lab, we actually did we lost 36 hours of data because it couldn't keep up. It was not fast enough for our workload. We had at the 24-hour mark, we had to shut everything down, roll back to and use the old, because you couldn't replicate 4.1 off of 5.0 either. And I spent the next year of my life basically building a tool to capture and replay. And then this is when Mark Callahan and the team at Google had done all of those tweaks for like CPU concurrency and stuff too, like testing all the Google patches. Percona was spun up that year too. Spent some time with Percona, and that was the first version of the tool that I wrote for it. You know, and I tested the fuck out of that thing, and finally it was like it was ready like the week before Thanksgiving, and they were too scared, they wouldn't do the upgrade, and I was so mad. I'm like, we're ready for this, y'all. We finally did the upgrade in January, and yes, for our workload, it was much faster than I had parallelized it. You know, we were doing like something I thought was super impressive, like 18,000, you know, QPS, mostly writes, which was great considering that it was on spinning rest. Now, of course, and it went perfectly, by the way. That was the first blog post I ever wrote. And of course, 6 months later, all of my effort became obsolete when we added SSDs for the first time.
Well, no, I mean, see, that's the thing is that I was watching a bunch of different talks that we have. We'll have some throughout the rest of the day. And people were like, I did all of this. And then a new feature came out in this, you know, language, or whatever it is. And all that work. But you don't know. And the other thing, too, is that you can't predict that some of these advanced features will come out when you need them, right? How many people have said, oh, well, we know this feature is coming from this vendor, and, you know, we just need to wait for 4.x or whatever. Exactly. And then 2 years later, the vendor's out of business.
Or they shipped it, and it works for some workloads, but not for yours. Or...
Yes. Now, the other thing, too, though, is that traffic replay is good if you want to maintain that kind of steady state. So here's it's kind of like a test oracle data set, right? So, you know, but then the other thing is, like I say, let's say like the holiday crunch, or, you know, we're adding a new region or whatever it is. These are, you don't have a history here. And so I think here you also need to put time and effort into synthetic load generation or synthetic, you know, query types, right?
That thing that you were saying before about, you know, spinning, you know, spinning down a node while you're spinning something up is actually something really close to what we did recently with Kafka. So we use a lot of Kafka. You know, obviously when requests come in, they get dropped, API drops them into Kafka, and then our custom built databases kind of like feed off of them and everything. And then they get, you know, archived. They actually age out to the S3 pretty quickly. But we had this issue where, you know, once you get up to like, you know, however 50 or 100 Kafka brokers, at some point, one of them is pretty much always breaking or recovering or something, right? And we realized that you can't have more than one recovering at the same time, which creates a pretty big choke point if, you know, if anything happens to, say, one of the AZs or whatever. And just that process was pretty flaky in general. So we set up something where every Monday at 2 p.m. we just kill the oldest one. We just terminate the oldest Kafka broker, right? So that we're constantly testing that state. And then every Tuesday at 2 p.m. we kill the oldest retriever node. And so just constantly testing that bootstrap and testing, you know, and you mentioned the network stuff too. And like that was part of it, because we realized that how quickly we would saturate the network if more than two nodes were trying to like bootstrap off of a node, it would saturate the network. You know, we just learned all this shit, and so now we just like proactively like kill a bunch of things constantly, so that it's always testing and it's always load balancing.
Right. Well, to paraphrase you, I mean, a lot of your talk was you can't passively wait for errors to show up. You need to look for weirdness. Yeah. Right. You need to go looking for the weirdness, and I mean this in the best way. Honeycomb is always looking for weirdness, right?
Always. Yeah.
It's practically like a brand, right?
It doesn't have to be super time consuming, you know?
No.
It can be like, you know, something we have triggers, right? So Honeycomb, like, so if you shipped a new feature and you're like, well, if this happens or that happens, that'll be terrible. So set up like, you know, a couple queries and just like ping you on Slack if those ever happen, right? Or like, you know, once a day when you're getting coffee or whatever, just like open up and run bubble up on a couple dimensions. Just like if something's weird, it should jump out at you with very little effort once you've instrumented and everything. But it does require that constant, because the trade-off is either you overpaid yourselves or you look beyond the pages to do some like, you know, creative outreach, looking in advance, right? But like we can't overpage ourselves. Like we just can't do that anymore. But that means that we can't just sit and passively wait for everything to tell us, right? We need to exercise some creativity, just like, and I also feel like this helps. This is almost like a warm-up period for software engineers that are not used to owning their code in production, right? Like getting good at those tools, getting used to feeling some ownership, getting used to that being part of what you have to have in your circle of things you care about, right? It's just, it's good for you. Like ops engineers are used to having to do this, right? Like you don't sit back and wait. You've got a dashboard or two like up on the wall, and once or twice a day, you know, you just kind of, you go sifting through things. Like it's just kind of a best practice. And now that engineers are responsible for their own code, like it's just time to start. And it shouldn't take a whole bunch of time, right? If you have the right tooling.
I think though that a critical thing here is also organizational philosophy, because you build into Honeycomb this strategic reserve for creativity, for the exploration, for the art, right? And so many organizations are running lean, which means that they're under hiring, and they're running at high burnout rates, and you're always overworked. And so you don't have time for that kind of creativity and that kind of exploration. And I think that that's a critical thing that you guys exemplify in many ways.
It's a really good point. Yeah, this can't just be one more thing to add to your already overflowing list of things that you have to do, right?
Yes.
There's a limit to how many one more things you can do. The idea is that this helps you keep a cap on those one more things, right? There are things you do as, you know, because they're debt, and there are things you do as an investment. And this is the kind of investment you make in your own collective future and sanity.
Right. Well, I hope you can stick around, because that is exactly the point that Bryan Cantrill is making on stage right now. In specific tool making, he believes that tool making is part of this strategic investment that people need to make in their organizations, in their code base. And so he'll be joining us in just 2 minutes. So I mean, if you're being patient,
I didn't get to see the talk, which I'm bummed about. Will I be able to watch it later?
Yes, all of that's the awesome thing, is that all of our talks are available on demand. As long as you register, you get to watch all the content afterwards. So that's great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm just blown away, because he keeps on unbidden from us. He just keeps on going. And like we asked him to do a promo video. He says, "This is my favorite conference."
That's awesome.
And for our second year, that's high praise indeed.
Yeah. But no, I liked this conference a lot last year too. It was really great.
Well, we have to say that you're part of the reason why this is an awesome conference. So there is one other thing I wanted to bring up with you, though, which is Honeycomb's. We talked about this exploration and going to new opportunities. Honeycomb made a strategic decision to take a look at the ARM-based AWS platforms. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. We've been doing a lot of, Liz has been very much the point of, you know, contact for this, but we've been testing Graviton in our systems for a while. It's saved it basically on par. We save about 40% on our CPU, on CPU costs. Yeah, Cynthia's got it. Yeah, it's great. It's not been drop in easy. Like we have loads that are very, very, you know, high compute needs, as you can imagine. Like, but basically our query planner is a bunch of Lambda jobs that fan out and like slurp a bunch of stuff from S3 and everything. So, but like we've used Honeycomb obviously to do the kind of, you know, you flip a feature flag for 30%, and suddenly 30% of your Lambda jobs are running on Graviton, and then you could just graph them. You know, here's the Graviton cluster, and here's the ARM stuff, and you can watch them next to each other, right? And oop, that wasn't working so well, so we turned it down. You know, we try some other stuff, we turn it back up. But I think that we're fully moved over to Graviton for our CPU intensive workloads now, and it's great. I mean, Honeycomb is really, I don't mean to just like plump and everything, but like I don't know how we do this stuff without Honeycomb, which is why we started the company after Facebook. You know, I was just like, I don't know how to go back to the battle days, but like there are so many things where like we're used to just kind of like shipping and then like eyeballing dashboards and trying to figure out using our intuition and our intellect. Like we're trying to reason about, you know, the impact that it had, because we can't just look at it. We can't just ask the question, right? If you can't break down by high cardinality dimensions and compare them, then there's just a lot of guesswork. And don't get me wrong, I love being the voice of God. You know, I love being the person who just like stares at the dashboard and goes, I perceive that it is Redis. Even though there's no Redis, I'm just like, I know it, right? I love being that God, but it's not scalable. It doesn't scale. Like nobody, you know, and then that means I can't go on my honeymoon or whatever. Hi, Bryan.
Hey, Jordan. Great talk.
I didn't get to watch yours because I was talking to Peter, but I'm going to watch it later.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. I think your talk.
I'm sure I will.
It did a good job of dovetailing with the keynote yesterday, and I actually thought that my talk did a good job of dovetailing with yours, which is nice because we actually don't know any of this in advance. And
I am just surprised, Bryan, that you did not grow the Mennonite beard.
Yeah. Have we talked about facial hair before? When I was like maybe in my 30s, I was like, I asked my dad, I'm like, Dad, I'm not saying I want one now, but out of curiosity, like facial hair, when is that going to happen? and he's like, Bryan, I want you to think back to everything that you've ever seen of any relative or ancestor of yours. Have you ever seen facial hair? I'm like, shit, no. Like, am I like a hairless variant of this age? I mean, it's just like, I'm just not. So yeah, I
have the same problem.
Exactly. So I have let myself on back. I do backpacking with the kids and so on, and so I get like 2 weeks going on and it's like and the kids are all like, keep it. I'm like, this is not this. No, this
doesn't
is
look healthy.
Wrong. It's just so, because you can clearly see that there are like parts of my face that are like with the program and like we are post-pubescent, we can grow hair, and other parts of my face are just like, we do not know what you're talking about. So it's just like, no, it's sorry, way too much information on. But yeah, the Mennonite beard is not happening anytime soon, nor is the stash, nor is.
So we have a request from the audience here. Do you want to tell people where Oxide is right now, and tell people about Oxide, because many people don't.
Sure, yeah, I can talk about Oxide all the talk, but although actually there's actually a lot of information out on Oxide, so there's tons and tons to go consume. I would actually Vector folks, we do a weekly Twitter space, which has been a lot of fun. We record all those. And Charlie, I don't know if you've done any of the social audio stuff, but it's been really interesting.
I actually have Twitter spaces later today on platform engineering.
Oh, nice. Are you doing that on a regular basis, or?
We've been doing like once a month or so, but I like the idea of doing it somewhat regularly.
Yeah, so what we have been doing is we do it roughly weekly, and then we record it, and we then put that out as a podcast that we call Oxide and Friends. And it's been great, actually. So I mean, Twitter, of course, this is like Twitter mismanagement. It's as is, on brand for, there are things obviously I love about Twitter, and obviously, Charity, you and I both owe a lot of our career. I mean, like Twitter's given us a lot, and Twitter also drives us nuts, right? So this is like, I want to be balanced about Twitter.
Take it away.
But this is something that I think is actually really important that I would love Twitter to really develop, because, and I actually, so Charity, something you'll appreciate. So we just did this open house at Oxide. Well, open house, not really an open house, because we couldn't have the internet show up, and I really did not want to get COVID. So we had a small number of people, a select group of people at Oxide. I had a number of younger engineers in their early 20s, mid 20s, coming up to me, talking about how meaningful the Twitter spaces were for them. Yeah. And I realized that it was, and this is like not a deep thought, but it has this very campfire quality of allowing, because I remember when I was a younger engineer, and Charity, I love all of like your writing on Parse, and I know at Linden, and I mean, it's like you and I both, when we were younger, really valued being around like these older engineers, and it was, going to lunch and going to dinner and like, this is
an apprenticeship industry. Like everything I learned from working with such amazing people.
Totally. And I think that the thing that is interesting to me about Twitter Spaces is it kind of democratizes that, right? Where where we had all of these, we would do these weekly dinners at this restaurant in Palo Alto that was extraordinary. Did it for years and had a really deep relevance for me in my career. And the ability to get like anybody can now come and sit kind of around the campfire is like pretty cool. And but you don't necessarily know on that stuff. You're like, I don't know, this seems interesting. But the number of people that were coming up to me being like, wow, it was so valuable for me to hear, because I think, and Charity, I know you and I had this similar when we were younger engineers, hearing what you kind of have a gut for but aren't certain of, come out from someone who's like 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 years further down the track, you're like, oh, I am right. Like, I actually, like, I wasn't sure if I was right about that. Like, I got like this budding feeling like, okay, fuck, I knew I was right about that. And it is really validating to somebody.
Or even, I knew that was harder than it seems. Like, if they're having a time with it too, I guess I'm not dumb. They're struggling with this too. Yeah,
I always look for that moment.
That's a really good point, because I mean, I'm an oversharer, so I tend to be very public about my like struggles as well as the kind of the victories. But a lot of people aren't, and there's this Instagram effect where you only get this kind of completed artifact, and everyone assumes that everyone else is just like not having the same struggles.
Rolled out of bed that way,
right? Yeah, rolled out of bed that way. And I think it's actually really valuable for people that were like, oh, like this was hard for you. This was a struggle. There were things that were, social audio is so another thing I've been doing actually is, so we have the team, the part of the reason because people like, we did this podcast on the metal, which I loved, but it was much more formalized. And I've been explaining to people why like, that's kind of not coming back. And we're going with the Twitter Spaces because it gives the team the opportunity to speak in their own words about what they're doing much more easily. I don't have to have someone in a studio. I don't have to, like, we can just like, people can hop on and offer their contribution. And it's been amazing. So this is, I know this is like a long answer to like, what is Oxide doing? It's like, so Oxide's a social media company? No, we're a computer company. But the social audio, so in particular, like anyone who's interested in Oxide, one of the things that we've been doing is we have been, Charity, totally. I love the interactivity too. And I love also like, you can get the good internet. And it's like, we're so used to now, like with the bad internet. And I mean, and I think, so, Charity, I think you and I are roughly the same vintage where like kind of came up as the internet was coming up. My freshman year in college was the year before the Eternal September. So I get the Eternal September. So the Eternal September is the September of 1993. So it used to be that every year.
Oh, you're a few years before me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to overly age you or underly age
myself.
That's
all right. I wish I knew what it was.
It's because of all the wisdom that you exude. Every year there would be this uptick because first years, freshmen would arrive at college and they had never been on the internet before, and not been on generally, unless you were a nerd, had not been on a BBS before. And so they just they didn't know netiquette, right? The whole idea of like netiquette, remember that? And so if you were a veteran on the internet, September, October, November was a mess because you had these new idiots that didn't know what they were doing. And so the Eternal September was in 1993 when you had the internet finally going to kind of the consumer. And it's the September that never went away, that you now had. It's like it never recovered in October and November because every month you were getting new bozos that didn't know what they were doing. And the thing about the internet is that like that era was incredibly delightful in so many ways. And we didn't actually fully realize how fucking sideways it was all going to go. And, the internet was going to be misinformation and division and, anti-scientific thinking and like all this other shit that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And now that all that has happened, everyone's like, ah, fuck, the internet sucks now. And it's like, yes, but there is that like delightful internet of like the person that you never met, the thing that you didn't know about, the thing that like is like, oh wow, like my eye just got opened. There's that the spontaneity. It's like, oh, it's like the milkshake duck without the milkshake duck, right? You know, it's like, oh wow, it's like, but you're not a Nazi. This is, and I feel like that's the Twitter Spaces can kind of capture that at its best.
So
I'm so fucking sick of video. Like I love, and I've always hated the telephone, but I'm just so sick of video. Like having it be audio only is such a relief now.
I do love audio only. In part because I grew up on the phone. Gen Xers grew up on the phone.
Yeah,
I'm very comfortable on the phone.
I think what's interesting when I do Twitter Spaces, by the way, I often do slides. I have like a Google slide deck that I talk through, and people can page through while I'm talking. But it helps focus people on the content and not on the creator or the speaker, right?
So that's interesting. I think, and it would be great for, this is like one of the 8 billion things that would be great for Twitter Spaces. The Twitter Spaces could do so much to facilitate this and to make it, there's just a lot you can go do. There's
another team that I know that uses a mapping app that literally you download the mapping app and you will follow the person as they lead you through the map from incident to incident. And you're just like watching it on your phone. It's like, oh, okay. And the map is moving for you, but you haven't touched the screen. So there's some very interesting kind of methods between using the audio to communicate, but then using some other form of visual to engage. So I think there's going to be a lot more that's going to come out like that, especially for Twitter Space. I think it's a really great platform.
Yeah. So and again, it started getting back to the original question. The thing that I love that we have done.
How's Oxide?
Great. And so the thing that I love that we've done. So the bring up is this kind of extraordinary activity when you have this new hardware platform. Like, I mean, I have joked, although it's not really a joke, that every day I learn that I don't know how computers work. And I mean, I've been doing it. It's like, it is so fucking complicated. The PCB, like, all hail the PCB. I want you to, like, everyone should go to your nearest PCB and give it some love. The printed circuit board is the printed circuit board, the integrated circuit. Like, the reason that we have luxury in our lives is because the printed circuit board and the integrated circuit. I mean, it is amazing how important these things are. The act of bring up is extraordinary, and it's never talked about.
I don't know what bring up means.
So bring up is when you've got a piece of new hardware and you are going to power the hardware on and get the software working on it.
Oh, we used to do that with stacks at Linden Lab because we had our own data centers, right? You get delivered on pallets, and you plug everything in and then you just turn it all on.
Right. So those are things that already work, though. I'm talking about like new board. New board. Okay. So you've got a new board. You've got either a proto board, or you're in what's called EVT, Engineering Validation Data House, and you are going to power this board on for the first time.
Yeah, and the first time I remember seeing this, it was an LSI 1103. A guy literally plugged it in, and ceramic exploded off the motherboard.
Right. So that's called the magic smoke. Right. That's the magic smoke. And like that's so the first thing you're doing when you are doing bring up is you're beeping things out. So you are actually like powered off. You are actually looking to make sure that things are all connected to the right things, and that other things aren't connected to one another. That for example, that you want to make sure that power and ground are not directly connected, right? You're short. So but then going from there to actually executing all of your software, and especially on a server board, is that as Ben says, magic smoke gets out. It generally doesn't go back in. I think that, and Ben has done a bunch of this, and I don't think that people have really talked about it before. So we had the team on to discuss bring up. So we did Tales from the Bring Up Lab, and I mean I think it was and we've done that now for every bring up. and talking about Charity, to your earlier point about like, because things go like almost tautologically, things go wrong in bring up.
Yes.
I mean, you absolutely positively things will be wrong that need to be reworked, that need to be, and you're trying to get all the way up to software, and then you're right at that software hardware interface, and it's extraordinarily interesting, but not really talked about. And we've been talking about it publicly in part thanks to Twitter Spaces.
Huh.
So there you go. But yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, because you were talking about tools, and I wanted to kind of talk about the dark side. You were also alluding to this a little before about talking about failure. There's so many tools that are left in abandonware state, right? They were a great idea when you first started. You were passionate about it. You got halfway through it, and then you're just like, I'm not ever going to touch this code ever again. I hate it.
The tool itself.
Yeah.
This happened with Scribe. Scribe was the thing that Facebook open source like 10, 15 years ago, and it was great. It was like way better than any other logging software out there, and they never touched it again. And there was this pile of like pull requests because people were using it, people were submitting patches, all these forks happened, and like the guy who had open sourced it got promoted and then never touched it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that the nice thing is kind of Ben saying in the chat here. I mean, the nice thing about software is that it doesn't actually wear out. So it is actually there for people to pick up and evolve. This is why open source software.
Well, they no longer compile on your kernel or your OS or your.
Totally right, and so you got some. You may have some work to do, but I think that this is why it's really important, and especially, I mean, one thing I would encourage. I didn't talk about it in the talk, but tool makers should absolutely positively be encouraged to open source everything they do. Because it's not related to their bottom line, assuming that you haven't yet pivoted into becoming the tool company, a la Stuart Butterfield twice. But if you haven't, because it's not related to the bottom line, you can safely open source it. I think you can open source everything, but you can definitely open source that. And then you at least have got a chance of getting that to get, I mean, that's actually the story of Docker, right? The story of Docker is them open sourcing their tools as an absolute Hail Mary, and then that becoming the new company.
Yep, took off.
And you definitely a bit rotten drifting interfaces and so on. But I think that it is so much easier. Software is so much more. It's so much easier than hardware in that in its ability to endure, survive. Yes, it can be a pain in the ass, but it's amazing how many tools that like continue to survive. I mean, like, how is GDB still alive?
GDB is the best. It is the best debugger of last resort.
It is the GDB.
It is everywhere, and it will always work if you've got no other choice.
GDB will definitely never die. It is not the good stuff, though. I mean, in terms of like GDB, it's
no,
like,
I mean, good stuff, but it's always there.
It is, but it is like, I mean, talk about like an orphan. GDB grew up on the mean streets, has got, lives hand to mouth, eats out of dumpsters, and it's like, yeah, we'll never die. But I mean, it's like, I guess it's like a raccoon or whatever. I'm not sure what the kind of the
absolutely. GDB is absolutely a raccoon.
But it's like it's not good, and it's like much. I mean, I guess I'm not sure if my point is that like bad tooling can endure forever, or that we should be investing in something better, but maybe both. Because it also GNU plot. Yes. The GNU plot is a
relic.
I love GNU plot. I'm a huge GNU plot fan. I don't know. Charity, what do you use for? I mean, obviously, because you are a tool company. You've got terrific graphing and heat maps and so on. What do you use for quick and dirty graphing? Do you have your own thing? This is going to be a piece of paper. Really? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. So my thing over the pandemic was taking up art. And so I've been drawing shit. And so, yeah, if I need to describe something to someone now, I just draw a pretty picture.
So, but if you need to graph out a quick series, are you like pen and paper? Like, hold on, let me like get my axes on here.
I mean, so here's the thing. I have never been a graphs person. My brain doesn't think in visualizing data, which is true, actually. I have never been I hired Ben Hartshorn twice now as my first engineer at 2 different places because he loves graphs. He'll be like up all night crafting the perfect dashboard for something. I wake up the next morning and I bookmark it and then I use it. Like it infuriates. I'm not good at this, which is why I feel like I'm the best, arbiter of is this usable or not. Now, I hate graphics.
Well, okay, there you go.
And I hate graphics.
All right, asked and answered. Oh, I'm a big GNU-plot fan. I love GNU-plot. GNU-plot is another one of these tools that's not terribly loved. But it's been it's maybe I probably feel about GNU-plot the way other people feel about GDB, and I'm sure the people that feel about GNU-plot the way I feel about GDB, namely like, good Lord.
I have an interview in 1 minute, so I need to go, but it's been delightful. I wish I could stay here and chat with Peter and Bryan, you guys, for a very long time because you're both delightful and I've missed this.
Yeah, Charlie, it would be good to have you on our Twitter space and vice versa.
I would do that anytime.
Great.
I would love to. Vice versa. Let's have you on ours.
Great talk, Charlie.
Peter, come too. All right. See you guys later.
Bye-bye. So Bryan, I have another question then,
Sure.
in terms of like the maladaptive tool making, right?
Yeah.
Which is the 5 days. I took 5 days this week, and I'm so proud I finally automated a task that would have taken me 2 hours.
Okay, yeah. No, this is a good point, and I do think that this is where I'm just trying to figure out what is reflecting on me. Something. There we are. Something.
There you go.
There we are. It's a book. No, that's interesting, and I think that maladaptive tooling. I think one does need to be careful when the more specific the tooling, the more paradoxically, the more you need to question it, which is kind of crazy, right? Like, so when you're doing something that is like super specific to the task that you have in hand,
right?
Like on the one hand, that feels very on task because I have this task at hand. I'm developing the tooling for this task. It's like, yes, but you may be overfitting. With respect, you may be overfitting the curve here, and you may be actually developing something that is actually only useful for this task. And as you say, you may be automating something that you may be taking 30 hours to automate something that would have taken you an hour and a half. And now, by the way, like that automation, like the tooling that I find most frustrating is bad automation.
Yes.
That's the shit, because it's like I would actually rather have it be manual than have the automation be brittle, honestly. Because with something that's manual, at least it knows what it is. When it's brittle automation, it becomes unreliable and really, really frustrating.
Yeah, the other thing too is I believe that there's a kind of a continuum. There are some tasks that are best fit for manual. There's some things that are best done fully automatic, but I also believe that there's a kind of a space between them, like a semi-automatic way of doing things. Maybe you'll do some things manually, or maybe you can take some basic cut at automation, but then you'll have to go through it by hand, right? So I think there's also that space as well that people need to take a look at.
Totally, and I think that there's a danger though in those semi-automated states. I mean, I feel like automation is its own. I mean, automation to me feels different from tool making, even though they're very, very similar and adjacent. To me, It is around that specificity. To me, automation of a task is very specific to that task, whereas tool making has a genericism in its purpose.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
But I think it's like I mean I'm not. This may be a distinction without a difference, but I do think that there is a bit of a distinction here that's important. And because I've been burned by this too. The things where people got automation happy when they shouldn't have, and then it ends up actually costing us a bunch of time and not really saving us a bunch of time.
Right, and I think also a lot of what your appeal was personal. I built DTrace for me, right? And I think that there are teams though that in big companies you have these tool teams that are actually supposed to be making a team not for themselves but for the team that they're serving, right? Yeah. And I think oftentimes what happens though is that those teams can end up making tools for themselves and not for their constituents.
Yeah.
And that is also an issue. Like, who are you building this tool for? Because if it's just for you, you might be fat, dumb, and happy using the tool you made for you, and all your customers, you're wondering why it's got zero pickup.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit paradoxical. I am I don't really like tools teams.
Okay.
Or let me put it this way: my experience with tools teams has not been good.
Right.
So I did not have good experience with tools teams at Sun, and have never replicated that since. And I wouldn't. Like if someone was like, I would like to dedicate myself to tool making, and I'm like, no. What you're going to do is you're going to dedicate yourself to making artifacts, and I'm going to give you very wide latitude to work on the tools that you need to work on. We are going to give you wide latitude to work on the tools you need to work on. But the problem that I found, I mean, several-fold. One, yeah, exactly. You get these narrow fiefdoms. You also get, like, it can be even worse than that, because they're at Sun, there was a tools. I mean, we were trying to turn tools into a separate business, which was bad. We were trying to monetize it separately, and they actually did not like us to ship tools as part of the operating system. In classic innovator's dilemma, because it felt like we were undercutting their business unit. And
yeah,
I mean, if you are a Sun customer of a certain vintage, the unforgivable act from Sun was debundling the compilers. So again, for a certain vintage of folks, and there we go. I got at least one of them. And there's always going to be one in every audience. It's like, God damn it, that's when Sun lost. Because what happened in Sunos 4.x, the compilers were included. And in Solaris 2.x, the compilers were not included. They were monetized separately. And this is in an era when, John, you remember, a compiler was like $1,000. Like, a compiler is not cheap in 1991. It's definitely not free. This is why GCC was such a big deal. So now it's like you've created this kind of organizational imperative for tooling to be over there. And if I need tooling as part of my job, I have to do it truly on the sly, because not only is it like not part of my charter, it's part of someone else's charter that actually doesn't want me to develop my own tooling because of their own organization. So it's like, that's a mess.
Yes.
And so I would much rather on tooling, I don't know, it's like having like a group in charge of like decency in your company. It's like, should everyone just be decent as the way they conduct themselves? You know what I mean? And if you have like, no, like that's the decency group. It's like, oh, then everyone else can be like an asshole because like they're not, I don't know. So okay, actually, Christoph asked this question is obviously this is, you're obviously hitting nerves here. Yes. Well, I mean, so I think that the problem with Linux is that all of these things are kind of like, there are like 5 solutions for any given problem, each of which is like 80% complete, or between 60 and 80% complete, which is my personal frustration. The reason that we don't use it as our hypervisor is because of that. Well,
let's take a look at the database space. How many databases are like 90% similar, but that 10%, the guys decided to like, fork a repo or completely rewrite something from scratch to do things, maybe the file format's different, or, maybe the distribution or scale out's different. But, this is happening, and it's not just in software. I mean, it's the same thing for even television shows. Like, how many things are just a slight bit off, and yet these days people are forking over and over again, and like diluting markets all over the place. So I think that this is a universal thing that humanity is going through. Maybe it's due to this internet thing being able to, all of us think that we're creators now, right?
Well, what I think is like, I think it's good. I think we should all be creators. I like that. I mean, I'm definitely like pro-creator. I think that sounds very weird, actually, especially someone who just quoted a Bible verse in their talk. Actually, Brian's got a great question were you encouraged to solve the unfun problems to get tools through the last 20% of functionality they need? The glory at Sun is that there was no one to prevent you from doing it. So it was not that I was encouraged. It's more like, well, who's going to stop you at some point? Right. I do think that like the biggest challenge in tooling to me is not that actually the unfun last problems. To me, the biggest challenge is actually in the first bit, because and even for DTrace, which we had like a pretty good vision for and had a pretty good hunch that this was going to be useful. it was really hard to get the time to, and actually this is funny. I kind of owe it to Spark in a way, because Spark was like having someone in your family with a very serious substance abuse problem, in that Spark, the instruction set architecture, because it's just like, you take them back into your home, you're trying to love them, and like, fuck it, the silverware's gone again. And they're back. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, fuck. And it's like, Spark, I love you, but I need to lock you out of the fucking house. And like, you've got to get clean on your own fucking terms. Like, I can't deal with this anymore, right? So it was tough. There were years in there for Spark that were really, really tough. Kind of and in particular, I had been called in on another fucking performance disaster with Spark, where they had willfully ignored a bunch of data. They had completely misdesigned a unit from a performance perspective, the TLB, the Sun, on Cheetah. For those of you who maybe at Sun, Cheetah, the most cruelly named microprocessor in history. It's like, isn't the Cheetah supposed to be a fast? Did we name it Cheetah because it's fast? Because it's definitely not that. But maybe we named it Cheetah because cheetahs are going extinct of their own without actually human involvement. Cheetahs are going extinct because they're over specialized. So maybe that's why we named it Cheetah. Anyway, Cheetah was dying, and there you go, exactly. You and everyone else, John. I'm like, look, I'm gonna jump in on this problem, but then I want 6 months for DTrace. I want to be able to, like, you have to give me 6 months in return. And that was the deal we struck. And so I got my 6 months to go, because that's what you need, is that really early investment period where there's no evidence of payoff. And I knew that, like, in that first 6 months, I need to be able to get far enough that we can show that this is a viable direction. And we were able to do that in the first 3, really. But certainly by 6, we had it was very clear that it was viable. And then getting that last 20% was actually relatively much easier, because there was no question about, yes, this is valuable, we should continue working on this, and everyone is using this. But it was the first 20% that was actually a lot harder.
So everybody is using this. I'm playing off that because I was watching it, your talk, and then I was like, okay, but tools don't hit different populations at the same time. It was available in Solaris. What was 2003? That was the first time it was publicly available, right?
Yeah, 2003 is when it was open source in 2005.
But it didn't hit Linux until like 2008.
Well,
right?
It arguably still hasn't. I mean, what you have is it's been ported like various times to varying degrees.
Yes.
And then you've got
open DTrace now, finally, right?
Well, no, not really. What you've got is, it's eBPF and BPF trace, and a bunch of kind of the system tap, and there are a bunch of, that was due. There were, but it was ported to FreeBSD. It was ported to the Mac. I mean, that was more, I think, honestly, more of a reflection on Linux and some various Linux pathologies than on DTrace.
But what I was thinking about, though, is that, like, people get used to these things like a third hand. Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, fuck, I can't do this on Linux, so I'm not going to use Linux, right? It becomes a shutout for some of these kinds of platforms.
Sure.
Or like it's not really it's not really Unix on Mac OS until DTrace is there, right?
Yeah.
But once it's there,
I personally have no problem with that. The tooling is very important to me, and
exactly.
I mean, the tooling very much informed. We at Oxide we're using an Illumos derived hypervisor, which is called Helios, very much in part because of the tooling, because of the I'm not. I actually, as part, believe it or not, people probably won't believe it, which is fine. But we actually really tried to do a very deep evaluation of the various options that we had for the hypervisor. And so I went pretty deep into eBPF and BPF trace, and not for me. Sorry. It's it's as if somebody explained to someone else that DTrace is useful to them without, I don't think that eBPF is, and again, it's fine, and BPF trace is getting better, but I tried to use it to debug some very simple problems and was hitting a bunch of problems that people would not be hitting if they were using it routinely to debug gritty problems. The kinds of problems I wanted to debug. Again, I don't want to disparage BPF trace or BPF, but
no, right.
It was.
It'll get there. It'll get there eventually. Right? You don't think?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, no. So I will. Well, let me tell you this. Like a bunch of folks that are that care. If you care a lot about instrumentation, like you may not be that. You may just be actually wanting to have a system that already has a bunch of that stuff already done. But like, let me give you some really concrete stuff that is like, this is, I know this is like super inside baseball. But this is the way that all these things kind of hold together. So one of the things that's really important for me is post-mortem debugging. We talk about DTrace a lot, dynamic instrumentation, but post-mortem debugging is actually really important for debugging fatal system failure. When a system dies, you get a core dump and the ability to debug from a core dump. The post-mortem debugging facilities in Linux are terrible. And I don't think that they're on any trajectory to get any better anytime soon. And I think that, so fine. But there's actually, one of the things that I've actually personally used a lot is what I call post-mortem instrumentation, where we use DTrace to instrument a running system that then fails fatally. And then we can go into that crash dump and actually extract all of the DTrace information to actually know we actually get all the data out of that enabling, which is a super inside baseball. I get the fact that like most people don't need or appreciate this. It's extremely important to me. It's one of these things that when you need it, you absolutely positively need it. And it's like, Linux going to get that eventually? No, I don't see. I mean, it hasn't gotten in the last 20 years. I don't know why it would. Why it would start. So we're using, Marian, we're using an Illumos derivative, Helios, for our hypervisor, and then we are on the Oxide rack. The Oxide rack is the VM is kind of it has effectively built-in EC2, EBS, VPC like functionality. So you are provisioning your own guests, which can be anything.
Okay, we got a question here. Were there any instances where you had second thoughts about the development of DTrace?
Yes. I mean, second thoughts is a bit strong, but there were two kind of important, great question, and kind of two important moments. One was, I don't think we can do this. I think that this is actually, I'm concerned that this is beyond us, that this software is just like too hard to get working. So there was that. And then secondly, it wasn't really a second thought, but one thing that a thought that I've gone back to a lot is I would use DTrace to debug any problem that I had in the broader system. And there were years and years and years where whenever I used DTrace, I would find the underlying bug that I'm looking for, and then I would also find a bug in DTrace. And I remember thinking to myself, when the fuck am I going to use DTrace and not find a bug in DTrace? Like, is that going to happen? And it just felt like that lasted forever. But it's like having kids, you know, like when you have kids and they're young, you feel like that period like is going to last absolutely forever, but they're actually not for forever. And the kids grow up and they actually do turn into humans.
Yes.
And then you like have a hard time remembering when it was like when they were 4. I feel the same way. Like I use DTrace all the time. I use DTrace basically every day. And I haven't found a bug in DTrace in years and years and years.
So we're joined now by Anton Rodriguez. Bryan, you are totally welcome to stick around if you got time. If you don't and you need to get back to your day job, we totally appreciate you and understand. So
you bet. I'll stick around for a little bit, but yeah, I'll obviously, Anton, welcome. I'll mute myself here.
Sure.
Thank you, Ryan.
We also have Steve Rosted is going to be joining us too soon too. So he's of course is going to be talking about trace command and a lot of